So they've scheduled the Argentina game for 3 a.m. here. And if they win, I genuinely think they might have to shut Switzerland down for a day. Grüezi miteinander and welcome to yet another Swiss Football Podcast World Cup special. And it ain't the last one because we've got at least one more after Switzerland came through a grueling 120 minutes plus penalties game against Colombia to reach their first World Cup quarter-final since 1954 when the tournament was held right here. Just an amazing moment in Swiss football, maybe the best moment in modern history, if you compare it maybe to the France game at the Euros a few years back. I can't wait to get into this to talk about thoughts and feelings before the game, what actually happened in the game itself, who stood out, who maybe didn't and why, and what this means going forward, not just for this tournament, but Swiss football in general. So as always, we'll talk about what was going on pre-game as the lineups were announced. But to be honest, it started hours and hours before that because the news was being reported all day that Johan Manzambi wasn't going to be playing, that he picked up an injury in training. A few sources kind of started reporting this kind of early on in the day, and you just kind of try and push it away and hope that it's not true. But of course, it ended up being true. Manzambi picked up a knee injury in training before the game. No real idea of how long he's going to be out. I don't know if this is going to potentially affect the Argentina game. It may do. Knee injuries are notoriously difficult to deal with, and I don't really see the purpose or necessity in pushing a player who is not going to be able to contribute if they're injured into that game, no matter how important it is. So fingers crossed, obviously, that he heals up and we have such an important player back for such an important game. But this is what Switzerland were left with, and obviously with not a lot of time, they had to prepare for an extremely important game, potentially the most important game in modern Swiss history. I mean, yes, you look at other knockout games that Switzerland have had in the past, but it was this game kind of presented an opportunity that Switzerland haven't really had in recent years, getting to the quarterfinal of a World Cup in a game that, all right, they may not have been favourites for, and some people may challenge that and say that the teams were pretty equal, but most outlets that I was looking at, The Athletic, for example, reported Colombia as their favourites for the game, that they believed that Colombia would take it. And I tended to agree. I did think that Switzerland were the underdogs going in, especially then when you take Manzambi out of the equation. This was a game that Colombia probably looked at and thought, this should be ours. Look at the stadium as well, and the masses of Colombian fans. It was essentially a home game for them. So losing key players like that, there was talk about Vargas potentially being injured as well. Obviously, he comes on in the second half, but clearly he wasn't quite ready to start the game. I don't really think that was a tactical decision from Yakin. So there was potential that Switzerland were going to find it even more difficult than they already were without Manzambi, with yet another influential player in Vargas not being a part of it as well. So the lineup gets released, and I got to say, I wasn't a big fan of how Yakin lined up. I understand that he was put in a difficult position, and I kind of understand why he didn't go man for man in the replacements. I kind of understand why he didn't stick with the 4-2-3-1, because I'm not sure if really many other players can come in and do what Manzambi did in that game against Algeria. What I didn't quite agree with, however, was going back to that 4-3-3, where I do feel that Switzerland have had some serious problems in this tournament. The gap between the midfield and the attack is just too big for me, with that flat midfield three and a flat attacking three, where you don't have that someone in the 10 role behind Real Mbolo to be brought into the game a little bit more. Manzambi played that role perfectly against Algeria in the last game, and you saw kind of flashes of it in the Canada game at the end of the group stages, even though he was kind of playing on the wing and the moving inside, it didn't quite work. What I kind of thought was that Fabian Rieder would come in and play as that attacking midfield to kind of link the midfield and attack. And potentially Noah Okafor comes in on the left with Ndoye moving to the right. That's what a lot of people were predicting was going to be the case. Not so as it turned out. Reader comes in, but he goes back to the wing, which we've seen before. Unfortunately, yet another kind of sign that Yakin and Okafor, for whatever reason, it just isn't going to happen this tournament. I very, very much doubt we see him against Argentina, unless there's some significant kind of additions to the injury list. Reader comes in on the left, and Ardon Jashari comes in the midfield for his first seconds of this tournament. I'm a massive Ardon Jashari fan. I've said it on this podcast. I've said it on other podcasts as well. I think he's absolutely brilliant. I was really, really pleased to see him in the team. What I didn't like was the idea that he was coming in this kind of three-man midfield where, yet again, we have three players who kind of do a lot of the same thing. However, we'll talk about Jashari's role because he only makes it through 45 minutes. I think we'll talk about why that is, because I don't think that he was playing the role that I expected him to play, but in the same vein, I don't think it was quite fair, the role that he was given. In the same vein, I can kind of understand it's very, very late in the day that these tactical changes have to be made, so something's got to be tried. It just didn't quite work out, but we'll come back to that when we talk about the first half. Otherwise, yeah, we'll go back to kind of what this game represented, because, as we've said, knockout games in the past, there's always that chance. It's always that, look, this is one game. Whatever happens, happens. And Switzerland have had some great moments in the past. You have that game against Italy in 2024. You have the game against France in 2021. You have a great performance against England as well in 2024 that just doesn't work out in the Euros. It did feel like, despite the fact that Colombia were the favourites, that this was a game open to anyone to win. And it offered a genuine opportunity for Switzerland to reach this kind of this holy grail of the quarterfinal that they just haven't been able to get to for such a long time. Losing those key players obviously massively punctured the kind of the tire that had been blowing up in terms of positivity for people. But even then, with the players that Switzerland can bring in and the kind of approach that you know they're going to bring, where they are going to be a little bit more pragmatic, a little bit more defensive, a little bit more contained, if they could have produced the same thing we saw against Algeria, anything was possible. That's how we ended the last pod, talking about how it's this one game, and if you play it the right way, like they did against Algeria, in a sense, it kind of doesn't matter who your opponent is, because we've seen from multiple teams in this tournament, you can frustrate big teams. You can turn them over. You can make them make mistakes, and it can work out. Switzerland now have the opportunity to do that against a huge opponent in Argentina. And when we talk about the end of the game and what kind of comes next, we'll talk about their chances and how I see it. But if this game proves anything, it doesn't matter whether or not you're the favourite. In a one-off game, doesn't matter who the opponent is, it can work in your favour. Let's talk about how Switzerland approached this game, what worked, what didn't, and who stood out. So in terms of the game as a whole, I'm not going to spend too long talking about the game itself, because apart from a couple of flashes here and there, the game was a bit of a slog. It was a war of attrition. It was two teams who I think were a little bit more concerned with not losing than they were with winning the game. There were opportunities, yes. Colombia would probably argue that they had the best of them. The early save kind of midway through the first half from Gregor Kobel, for example, is absolutely fantastic. And I completely understand why Kobel goes and gets man of the match for this game. He kind of steps up exactly when you need him to. We've spoken previously about how Switzerland can be sure of this defensive solidity they have while still using the ball offensively, especially in that game against Algeria with the four men up front in that 4-2-3-1, because you know that you've got a great goalkeeper behind you. I've spoken to a couple of people over the course of this tournament about, do Switzerland have any great players? Do they have any players who you would kind of put on that kind of top pedestal of the game internationally? On the whole, no, I think is the answer to that. Granit Xhaka, maybe a year or two ago, would probably be in that argument. I don't quite think he is now, despite how good he can be and how important he is to Switzerland and Sunderland, for example. I'm sure Sunderland fans are absolutely delighted that he'll be staying with them now. There were rumours, of course, he was going to Chelsea. But Gregor Kobel, I think, does come into that conversation. He might not be the most incredible goalkeeper. He might not be the flashiest goalkeeper, but he is so solid and so kind of comfort inspiring for the people around him. You can see that his defence trust him. I've seen him play with the ball at his feet more this tournament than I think I've ever seen before. And he's not been half bad at it. He's been very much involved in Switzerland's attempts to beat high pressing teams, which is exactly what we saw in the first half, particularly against Colombia. Their press was wildly high and caused some significant problems, but not right at the back. Kobel and his defenders actually played pretty well around that press. The big problem for me in that first half was the midfield and then the gap to the attack. Going back to that 4-3-3, the same problems that we've seen in previous games came up. Once Switzerland played around that press, which they were doing quite well in the deep sections, once it got into the midfield, time after time after time, it's just given away. No rhythm, bad touches, bad passes, maybe getting it up to Embolo, but then he's completely isolated. Nobody's around him because Rieder and Ndoye are playing so deep out of possession that by the time the ball's back in possession with Switzerland and Embolo's got it, no one's anywhere near him. And he can't lay it off to anyone. He can't bring anyone into the game because Colombia have got at least one or two men around him at all times because they know there's nobody else that's coming to help him. The fullbacks have got the wingers covered. Defensive midfielders and centre-backs have got Embolo covered because there's no Manzambi. There's no Rieder in the middle with Okafor out wide. Vargas isn't there either. Ndoye and Rieder are stuck out wide because they have to be there as part of the defensive unit out of possession. The only person that is kind of around Embolo and kind of trying to help make things work is Ardan Jashari. And look, you may not know a lot about him. What he is not is an attacking player. He is very, very comfortable turning over possession, keeping the metronome ticking, driving the ball forward every now and again. He's not an offensive footballer. He's not someone that's going to bag you 5 to 10 goals per season. He is a solid defensive midfielder. He's good with the ball at his feet. He's good at passing it. Most of the time, especially out of possession, he's right by Embolo as part of almost like a 4-4-2. And look, I get it. It was last minute. Changes had to be made. People had to be brought in, but I don't understand the idea of putting Jashari in that position. At half-time, he comes off because it's not working. Because once Switzerland get the ball, Jashari is not in the position that you want him to be in. Even out of possession, he's not in the position you want him to be in because you want him as a deep-lying midfielder to help with the defensive efforts, not pressing the Colombian backline or their midfield. I just couldn't really get my head around it, and it made the first half very, very frustrating to watch. There were some positive moments. There were chances. Rieder had a decent chance towards half an hour. Dennis Zakaria played a great ball in. Also, another good game from Dennis Zakaria, by the way. I need to kind of tip my hat to him again at right back. Jashari himself plays a fantastic kind of reverse ball through on the left-hand side that just doesn't work out. But otherwise, it's a real slog of a first half. There's just not a lot going on here. And I doubt either team would have been particularly happy going in at half-time. But I think if you're making a kind of pick, I think Colombia probably go in the happiest of the teams at the half because they're the ones that are just about fashioning opportunities. They're the ones putting pressure on the Swiss backline who can't really seem to get anything sticking in terms of possession play. Second half, kind of the same. Changes are made. Jabril Sow comes in, who's probably a little bit more suited to that role than Jashari, but it is kind of backs to the wall. It is just kind of dealing with what Colombia are throwing at them and trying to work some chances every now and again, but it's very, very clear as the half draws on that it's not really happening. And if it is going to happen, it's going to be a bit of a chance out of nowhere. The backline are under a lot of pressure. Kobel's playing really well. A shout out I'll give actually is Nico Elvedi, because I don't think he's really been mentioned at all this tournament. Akanji is often the one in the backline who kind of looks the most assured, is making the big choices and doing them the right way, and that's fair. He's a fantastic defender. I feel like Colombia really put pressure on Elvedi, especially over the top in this game. Luis Diaz in particular is constantly coming into that channel between Zakaria and Elvedi on the right hand side of the defence, and I think Elvedi deals with it really well. He is not a flashy player in any stretch of the imagination. He's a really solid centre back. And he does his job really well against a very, very dangerous attacker in Luis Diaz. So shout out to Nico Elvedi because I don't think it's someone who's going to get mentioned a lot, but I thought he had a really, really, really good game. Another player that I will shout out as well, because while all of this is going on, this kind of messy game from Switzerland where they really, really can't get their foot on the ball and start playing with it and put Colombia under some pressure that isn't just kind of here and there and kind of every now and again random chances popping up here and there. Granit Xhaka had a real captain's game. And I don't mean that in the sense that he is kind of, making things happen in the midfield and creating chances here and there and maybe getting a chance or two himself. He's not doing a lot of that. And if you look at his statistics from the game, it's not that. It's not about his offensive play. It's not about how he's bringing other players into the team. What he's doing is he's recycling possession fantastically. When he does get the opportunity to play it, he is playing a high percentage of his passes correctly, and he is one of the few that is doing that. But on top of that, in what could have been an extremely frustrating game for Switzerland, Xhaka is the one keeping everyone calm. Colombia are putting a lot of pressure on the players. There's a lot of fouls for both sides, to be completely honest. Everybody seems to be going down every 5 seconds, and there's a little bit of needle here and there. I feel like the Colombian players were probably trying to get under the skin of the Swiss, and Xhaka is there every single time, completely calming things down. I don't recall a point at which he gets kind of involved in anything heated. He's picking players up. He's laughing with them, with the Colombian players as well. He seems to have like a genuinely good rapport with a lot of them. And I don't know whether it's like a respect thing. Maybe he's the guy that they kind of recognize from the Swiss team. I don't know what it is. But for a guy who is kind of traditionally hot-headed and traditionally doesn't keep his cool that much, I thought that he was one of those who really stood out as someone who genuinely brought something to the game for the team overall. And that was his general attitude, just keeping a lid on everything that I think got Switzerland through that difficult 90 minutes at times and into that extra time period. Now, as the game's winding down, obviously things are being changed for extra time. Cedric Itten comes on for Breel Embolo, for example. Wasn't 100% sure about that, but I don't know, maybe Embolo maybe it was he just couldn't quite get through that extra time, or Itten's coming in for a little bit more defensive solidity because they expect Colombia to come at them a bit more in extra time, things like that. But it becomes pretty clear that Switzerland are planning for extra time and maybe playing for penalties, and that they see that's their maybe best way of getting through this. I don't know. But you get into extra time and there's big chances for both. Obviously, Colombia hit the bar pretty early on. I think it's 98th minute or so. But then Amdouni has a great chance as well. So close to kind of nicking it in towards the end of the first half of extra time. And it kind of continues like that with both teams just every now and again trying to pick each other off in the second half of it. But it seems pretty clear from then on it's rolling out to penalties. And then you have that awful kind of feeling of, again, penalties again. Switzerland do not have a great track record. Ignore that France came in Euro 2020. Otherwise, it's been pretty bleak when it comes to penalties. And I imagine that the memories of England kind of come flooding back. Such a good performance against that England team in the Euros, only to go out on penalties must have been absolutely heartbreaking. And of course, it comes pretty close to being the same guy. Manu Akanji misses the penalty, the third penalty, I think it was, to just put that pressure on Switzerland. And, he sinks to the floor after it goes over, and you just think that's potentially going to have a massive effect on the mentality of the team going into the shootout, the rest of the shootout. And then Gregor Kobel held. What a save. He nearly caught it. I mean, you talk about his solidity earlier in the game and that kind of calming influence that he brings to his defenders. I mean, is there a better sight for a team just wobbling a little bit in a shootout that they had started well in? You get that lucky hit off the bar onto the line from Davinson Sanchez. Is there a better feeling for a team in that situation when your big, massive goalkeeper springs to his right? And by the way, as a goalkeeper, as a right-footed goalkeeper of past times, it is a lot harder to go to your right, off your dominant right foot, than it is to go down to your left. It's actually way easier to go this way. For him to get the power and the kind of the height on his jump to that side. Don't underestimate that. And then you kind of almost see it in slow motion. He takes the ball in his hands, and it's almost like he kind of tries to catch it and then immediately pushes it away because he's like, that doesn't matter right now. Just get the ball away from goal. It's such a good save. And you talk about the pressure of then, Amdouni and Vargas stepping up to take their penalties too. Don't get me wrong. That's pressure. And goddamn Ruben Vargas, what a tournament he has had. You talk about Manzambi and the influence he's had, but Ruben Vargas has been excellent 99% of the time. That game against Qatar, the first one, he does so much in that game and just can't quite finish off when he needs to. He has that great chance to open his account and he wastes it in the second half against Qatar. Ever since he comes on against Bosnia, it's him and Manzambi that have made this tournament for Switzerland. And yet again, he has that opportunity to stamp his name on it for Switzerland, and he really, really takes it. It's a great penalty. Just under that amount of pressure, I can't even imagine getting up to take it. But for me, it's that moment from Gregor Kobel that wins the shootout for Switzerland. Just that complete reversal of fortune after the Akanji miss. And you can see on Akanji's face just how relieved he is that Kobel does that and kind of bails him out. And that just must push the confidence of your team going forward. And for the Colombians, you can just imagine that sinking feeling of here's our chance to get back into it, and bam, shut out completely on the next penalty. I mean, I don't know if you don't follow many Swiss accounts, you probably haven't seen the kind of scenes from around Switzerland at the watch parties and in the cities afterwards. The scenes in Zurich at Hardbrücke, for example, have been amazing after every single game. It just seems to get more and more people setting more and more flares off and doing more and more damage to public property. I honestly don't know what's going to happen to Zurich if they beat Argentina. They like I said, they might have to shut the place down, the entire country maybe, because I don't think anybody's going into work the next day or the next week. Probably we'll just have an extra fastnacht maybe for beating Argentina, let alone the semi-final itself. But let's talk about that. Let's go into what happens after all of this and how we possibly move forward. Yeah, Argentina. Wow. I think even without all of the controversy, quote unquote, around the game against Egypt, I don't personally, I don't really see it as controversial. If you're going to be, if you're interested in my opinion at all, I don't really think that anything untoward happened in that game. I know that people don't like VAR. I'm one of those people. I hate VAR. I'd much rather see it out of the game. But it's a foul before that second Egyptian goal, and then they go 2-0 up, and then they've got 15 minutes to hold on, and they concede 3 goals. That doesn't come down to corruption or VAR or anything along those lines. That's just not being able to handle the moment. That's being a little bit too emotional, which you can see in their response to all of it, and the kind of scenes that you see after the game and the comments that have been made after the game. But look, that's nothing to do with us. That's in the past now, and we need to focus now on the team coming in to play us in this quarterfinal. And the one thing I will take from that Egypt game is that this is an Argentina team that can be beaten. This is not the same team that won the World Cup in Qatar. This is not the strongest team in this tournament. France are the strongest team in this tournament. I would put money on Spain, probably doing quite well against Argentina, and probably England as well. Whether or not Switzerland is strong enough, particularly if, say, Manzambi is not playing, if there's any more injury issues going into that game. I don't know where Ruben Vargas is, whether he can start, for example. If Briel and Bolo can't get through extra time, then maybe that's an issue. But again, that might have been a tactical thing. And of course, if that version of Lionel Messi turns up that we have seen in this tournament for Argentina so far, any team is going to struggle against them. But it's just that one game. All you need is a good opening 45 minutes. You need to put the fear into that Argentina side that it's not working. And what you see is that disorganized, disjointed game that they played against Egypt, where on the counter, they were being eaten alive. It's not just those 2 goals that went in. You have the disallowed goal as well. You have multiple other chances for Egypt on the counter-attack against an Argentina defence that looked like 2 men at times. This is what Switzerland can do. Okay, maybe not the most counter-attacking side. Maybe that's not their strength. But containment, frustration, making things difficult for the opposition, taking opportunities when they arise, in vast comparison to that Qatar game in the first match. This is what Switzerland have become very, very good at this tournament. If they have everyone available, if the opportunities arise within the game, if they can play that good first 45 minutes, it doesn't have to be pretty, but if it works, it works. It's one game. There's not much else to say about it other than that. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be insanely difficult. Argentina are a fantastic side. I'm not sitting here saying that they're not good just because there are stronger teams at this tournament. What I'm saying is it's doable. It's not impossible. And I think Switzerland do have to kind of leave that idea behind of impossibility. It's been a long time since, for example, the demolition job at the hands of Portugal. You know, this is a very, very different Swiss team from there. It's a very, very different mentality. It's a very, very different expectation. No one in Switzerland expects Switzerland to be in that semi-final. But people will be out in their droves at 3 a.m. watching that game. The entire country will be awake watching that game. Coffee machines will be popped on all over the place. If they can do it, it'll be monumental. If they don't do it, I think this still goes down as maybe the best Swiss tournament performance in modern memory. Not in the sense that it's lit the world on fire, but it's just underlined the idea that no matter what people think, Switzerland are very, very much a team to be reckoned with. They are not a team to be overlooked. Now, in terms of what that does for Swiss football, my hope, obviously, given what I do and given what I, produce on a regular basis, is I hope that that means that we have a little bit more attention on the game here. That's externally as well as internally. It can't just be that the national team goes off and performs well at all these tournaments, and yet we don't have a reaction in the domestic game, that we continuously lose all of our best talents to countries around the world, around Europe, because we can't offer them enough here until they are reaching their retirement ages and coming back for something a little bit more comfortable and for a last paycheck. It's a bit harsh, but that's kind of the reality, is that players will come here when, I can't quite make it in these top divisions anymore, so I'll come back to Switzerland because I'm comfortable here and I know the system, because there's not a lot of pressure here. I don't have to perform massively well. Everything's okay. I'm hoping that what we see here is a recognition from external countries as well, that Switzerland is something a little bit more than what it seems to be, but also internally too. People say, look, why are we wasting an opportunity in a sport that clearly is something that we can do and that we can produce talent for? Switzerland can produce talent. Let's try and keep more of it here. Let's try and develop this league more, this system more, so that we can start having a stronger impact. Similar to what you saw from, say, Basel in the 2010s, the early 2010s. We haven't had that kind of run in Europe, that kind of team cementing itself and saying, hey, we're here to play and we're here to bother teams that would just assume that they can come and roll us over. That has to trickle down now from the national team into the domestic game. But look, that's down the line. What we have to focus on now is an incredible opportunity for Switzerland to reach a stage that I don't think anybody thought they would do, come into this tournament. It's going to be insanely hard, but it's possible. It's absolutely possible. If everything works right, if the right people are available, it's absolutely possible. It's got to be. Otherwise, what's the point? See you after that one. Ade.